Welcome to Follow the Content Leaders, a podcast where we will learn how leaders, entrepreneurs, CEOs, coaches, and consultants use their content in their business strategies. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to our podcast, Jacob. Happy to have you.
Hello. Well, happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Sure, super excited for this. I wanted to start with a first question of what is the mission of Modern Maker? So, why did you build that?
Awesome. So, I mean, in my world, I've had lots of ups and downs and encountered many clients and gone through so many coaching programs and things. And, decided to build Modern Maker to help solopreneurs basically scale to 10K per month through inbound content, through offer creation, and basically be able to sell online primarily through social media and email.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of touching on all the fundamentals of the story and the encounters that I've had, but showing people how to do it the way that suited me best through implementation.
Nice. That's amazing. And another thing I also like to start the podcast with is a bit more personal. So, what is the one thing that's always in your office and that you cannot work without?
That's cool. It's funny you say that. I've got this little Pikachu that
That's
always,
nice.
it's kind of like a childhood endeavor. I used to be, as a 90s kid, be obsessed with Nintendo and games and little universes. So this guy's always around, and I always have my, coffee
Of course.
to start the day. There's plenty of little bits and pieces around, but I think that these would be the ones that keep me going every day.
So cool. Do you look at him for some advice sometimes, Pikachu, or?
Yeah, actually, it's funny you say that. When I was a software engineer, they used to
Mm-hmm.
have this rubber duck syndrome. So whenever you were stuck and the code wasn't working, software
Mm-hmm.
engineers would speak to a rubber duck, and then that would be kind of your friend to
Okay.
unblock. So on occasion, we do have a conversation with Pikachu.
I'm sure he's heard you go through lots then.
Yeah.
Great. So we've talked about Mother Maker. That's your current project, but you've also built Mojo Design before that. That's a web agency that's been in business for how long now?
I think this year is our seventh year in
Wow.
business.
Congrats.
Thank you. Thank you.
Amazing. And I was curious a bit because for Modern Maker, we know you've used content, and we're gonna speak about that later on. But to build Mojo Design, did you use content for your own like prospection strategy, or how did you build that business?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, primarily my background came from content, SEO, email marketing, whatever, but to get clients, which was actually the birth of Modern Maker.
Mm-hmm.
Being a creative, owning an agency and software engineering and designing, you were good at your craft, but how would you get clients? And that was a question that came up again and again through other agency owners where we used SEO and blog creation, like long form, to create what we call power assets at Mojo.
Mm-hmm.
Primarily started locally by targeting, if somebody searched web design Cyprus or web development
Mm-hmm.
Cyprus, they would be hit with a blog that explains all the fundamentals there. And we would create little spider webs of, topic clusters relating to each one, and
Mm-hmm.
everybody who's actually using Google to search would stumble on us and would be ready to buy because they were already solution aware. But in the early days, we did a lot of outbound and cold emails. When I say we, it was all me in a room, my fiance's attic, on the phone, referrals, doing all sorts of things to get testimonials. But
Mm-hmm.
those were naturally like not in my personality type. I think I would get too scared, or that method didn't work. So then as soon as I doubled down on the content creation side, then SEO really helped us build the business locally, and then through referrals and retainers we managed to kind of scale it globally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you did what you had to do to start with, right? Even if it
Yeah.
was not your like kind of cup of tea, but then it worked and you managed to build down the system that fits your personality and still makes you grow in the business, which is great. And then in terms of Modern Maker now, yes, where you've built more throughout content on LinkedIn, what role would you say content has played on building your business and finding clients?
Yeah, I mean, primarily looking from Mojo as well. One thing I forgot to tell you was social. Like we've been on Instagram with a very small audience, and
Mm.
funnily enough, our strategy has been memes.
Mm-hmm.
Making people laugh, like info and education, creating like that piece, and then entertainment. So infotainment, if you like, got us this
Mm-hmm.
far. And then for Modern Maker, I mean, the number one asset I had was always my social media handle on LinkedIn as my primary platform, and then email
Mm-hmm.
later. But essentially, content is the number one driver for all my business. Everything, obviously, I took sales calls at the beginning and did all of that. But I would say nowadays, like 95% of it comes from content. The other 5% is through referrals and renewals from people recommending. It
Mm-hmm.
like played such a vital role because you're able to express yourself, invoke emotions, get people to
Mm-hmm.
feel something, and then convert them in on the back end to become customers and then clients.
Definitely, yeah. And we've talked about LinkedIn, you've spoken also about Instagram. Are these the two main channels you've used both for Mojo and for Modern Maker, or have you used also Facebook, I think, or other channels?
Yeah, so my days initially started on Facebook back, 7 years ago. That was the hot thing there, and we still use it for Mojo. It's a text-based platform at the core, and then we would get people to an email list and nurture them, and slowly like build a small list. But
Mm-hmm.
primarily for Modern Maker, I use LinkedIn as the number one platform to get them into email. Over the last year, I've kind of expanded into YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram with automation tools, and Twitter as well. But I would still say that again, 90% of it comes from LinkedIn, which naturally, you double down on a
Mm-hmm.
platform that suits you best,
Of
and then
course.
expand through time.
Yeah. And this is a bit the place where you're creating content. I'm also curious to know where do you consume content, right? Like what do you enjoy reading and consuming?
I mean, for this is a great one that I always kind of ask because for me, we live in the attention economy, and right now there's
Mm-hmm.
so much to consume that I'm a little bit old school. Where, like one of my idols, Ben Settle, has a monthly physical newsletter that he sends to my door, and I still enjoy getting that subscription and reading it and making time, obviously through
Mm-hmm.
books and stuff as well. But I always have a saying where when you start consuming a lot online, you start to become what you consume. So one thing I try to do is consume something irrelevant to my business, like philosophy or anime or entertainment,
Mm-hmm.
comics, all sorts of things just to spark that creativity that are
Mm-hmm.
unrelated, um, and then bridge that in. But obviously, my main consumption again is LinkedIn being my primary platform. And also, by default, I do a lot of scrolling on Twitter because people have a lot of ideas that are short and snappy.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a very limited selection of people on my email list. I've got an email that I subscribe to specific people and then just consume their content for ideas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's great. I love the concept of trying to consume content that's unrelated to what you do, just to, because otherwise you just keep reading about the same ideas, the same concepts all day long. So, for sure, something that I kind of do too, not on LinkedIn, because on LinkedIn I do, at the end of the day, follow most of the people that are in my business, I think. But
Mhm.
then outside of that, for sure, I'm not reading about content creation on Saturdays mornings, for instance.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I'm curious about your process, right? So you have generated a lot of content that has generated lots of leads, both for yourself, your two businesses, your clients. So of all the process of generating content, which is the part that you enjoy the most of?
That is an awesome question. I mean, recently I had a brand strategist kind of look at my content, and he revealed something amazing, which he said, when I read your emails, that is Jacob 100%, the sarcastic, the witty, the calm, kind of simple-minded person. And then on LinkedIn, you appeared a little bit more, short and succinct and whatever, where, obviously systems work and I do have a strategy, but on what to post, because you either end up selling more or giving too much value, and you have to always
Mm-hmm.
find the in between. I think my zone where I have the most fun is emails based on what we just spoke about, where I learned to tell stories based on incidents that I have every day. So whether that's
Mm-hmm.
walking the dog or going grocery shopping or consuming something, watching a TV series or whatever, my email naturally is where I come off as more natural, where it's a very simple framework where we have a story, a lesson that came from the
Mm-hmm.
story, then we pivot and we make an offer. Where there, that is my opportunity to be a little more authentic and actually get people to understand. A lot of people come in my world and say, "Oh, you have cats and dogs, or you like this type of food, or whatever." Where for me, it's mostly like documenting that journey for somebody two steps behind, that has come off so much more natural. Like my content strategy is literally my calendar. What did you do? What did you learn? Who did you help? How? Is there any model? And then I break
Mm-hmm.
it up in that way. But on LinkedIn, I would say it is a little bit more strategic, because you have to find a balance between the value and the sale. So I do have a very simple system where I either teach something, some knowledge, I either
Mm-hmm.
show somebody something like a model or a framework, I either share something completely random, irrelevant to business,
Mm-hmm.
or I invite them into my universe to watch something on YouTube, subscribe to the list. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
before it was really defined, and it kind of, sometimes you got to learn the rules to break the rules.
Yeah.
And I think that very simple teach, show, share, invite model just
Mm-hmm.
keeps me within a framework, but then that I can get more creative when writing.
Yeah, so interesting. Then you learn how everything is so complex and then you simplify it for yourself to make it easy. That's kind of how I work too. So for sure, I love your emails too. So I'm just gonna say that I enjoy them a lot. And then a bit more of like, how do you process every piece of content you write? Because we spoke about the strategy, but like, are you writing first and then editing? Do you write and edit at the same time? How does that look for you?
Yeah. So, I mean, the way that I do it, and obviously through experience, and everybody's brain works in funny, different ways.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I have something, well, one thing is called a story bank. So I find little incidents that happen through the day, and I just give myself a little bullet point. So I would call that the ideation stage. Or
Mm-hmm.
every Friday morning with my cup of coffee or tea, I would look through my calendar and write little bullet points of who I spoke to, what sort of email responses I got, or in the Modern Maker community, anybody who asked a question, and then
Mm-hmm.
those are the ideation. Then the next sort of thing is like I start writing, but I chunk every bit. So if I've taken a story or a question, I would chunk it into sections, like
Mm-hmm.
just write freely. What was the problem? Did you recommend something? Was there some sort of insight that you gave? And then make an offer. So again, a tiny little framework in there, but I will never edit as I go, because I think that
Mm-hmm.
sort of breaks your creativity line. I want everything on the page. I always tell myself, don't write more than 200 words if it's on an email, or keep the
Mm-hmm.
post succinct. And then I put my editing hat on, where it's a very simple phrase. Like, I ask myself, does it make sense? If it
Mm-hmm.
does, can I make it shorter? Now I trim basically the words, eliminate little bits like just or additionally or lastly or really or whatever.
Yeah.
And then I kind of ruthlessly edit there. And the last thing I do is uh, either spin up a subject line if it's email or a hook at the end if it's a
Mm-hmm.
post, and make sure the call to action is done finally. But that method kind of helped me be a little more free than before, where it was like think of the hook and then write and edit as you
Mm-hmm.
went along. I take more the, I don't know, I would say the creative side to enjoy it more,
Yeah.
using this way.
That's nice. Yeah, it's a good process. And I'm curious, do you allocate specific times of the day and the week to do each of these phases? Or do you just like whenever you feel like you do one or you feel you do the other? How does that look like?
Yes. So my ideation happens at any given interval of the day.
Mm
I have a Google Keep, and then I put everything in the story bank or in the idea bank, which takes a matter of seconds.
hmm.
Even
Mm
this has already sparked ideas. So I'm just
hmm.
gonna like open it, give myself the bullet points, and that always happens asynchronously. I think you end up having a huge story bank. Right now I have like maybe 2,000 little bullet points in there. But what I do is I set my Wednesday mornings for content creation. I have a block of time,
Mm
and I'll write everything on LinkedIn. But over time, my emails literally are written on the morning, on the day.
hmm. Mm
I would
hmm.
look through the story bank, enjoy a cup of coffee, and write. And that's the first thing I do as a highly
Mm
leveraged activity. Obviously, don't recommend that to somebody that's a beginner, but I always know internally there's like overarching topics that I know hit using
hmm. Mm hmm.
analytics, after you start kind of getting out there. So my email is more free, but LinkedIn is more like a Wednesday morning thing. But what I do is I segment, the first hour is writing freely,
Mm
and then
hmm.
I'll go back and edit, three or four posts in one sitting with the editing hat on.
Mm hmm.
And then obviously, like, once a month or bi-weekly, I will look at my analytics and say, did the audience give me a signal of something that did really well?
Mm hmm.
And then on Wednesday, I'll have a little link to know, okay, repurpose this maybe, and then that
Of
cuts
course.
your content creation cycle.
Yeah, so funny. I have to do it in separate days. I'm incapable of putting on the creatives hat where you're kind of, I call it like vomiting everything in your head, and then removing it and putting the editing hat. I just have to like let it sit and then I go back to it. So I have like different slots. But yeah, funny that you can do everything at the same time.
Yeah, I think.
And yeah,
Oh, sorry,
sorry.
you were going to
No,
say
no,
something.
no. You go.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, for students as well that I coach, it's usually on a separate day or a separate time because you don't want to mix the creative with the editor. It's much better looking at something, sleeping on it, and coming back in like a day or two and going, okay, now I'm gonna edit, and that's the only thing I'm gonna do. It's more of a
Yes,
admin task instead of a creative
exactly.
task.
And it's something you can even do like listening to music, whereas when I'm being creative, I really cannot, I need silence. I cannot be having different inputs. Yeah, it's funny how our brain sets the mode for everything in a different way.
Yeah.
Then another question I always ask is what is the part you hate the most about creating content? If there is anything that you don't like, maybe you love every bit of it, but sometimes there is some things where like, "Ugh."
Yeah, no, this is interesting. It didn't come right away, but I think, especially on LinkedIn, we're looped into this universe of copy what works and make sure it goes viral or it grows.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes it's almost been like a creative blocker where I'm like, oh, this person did this and I need to model it or copy it or reuse it in a way which
Mm-hmm.
actually creates more blockers. But then the moment I said, just write to your audience, write to the 100 people you want to attract, I
Mm-hmm.
stopped caring about these templates and these hooks and these ways of writing, where before it used to literally like slam the door shut. And I was like, how do I do this? I need to model this, which was a sign that mostly the last year and a half or so I stopped doing. I'll only
Mm-hmm.
use that as inspiration. Um, but I think that way, I just write to invoke emotion, write to say what I feel and document has made
Mm-hmm.
it so much more fun. And also, being within a system strictly stopped me from enjoying the process. Like, oh, it's Monday, I have to write this top funnel post. Now I'm like, you know
Mm-hmm.
what? There's days where I don't even plan and I just document and it comes across naturally. And I
Mm-hmm.
think there is momentum in recency. Like when a recent event happened and you write about it in a couple of days, there's so much more momentum than scheduling it like 40 days from now, energetically.
Yeah.
But I think that's the piece I hate the most, like having a full structure that you have to follow to a T.
It can help a lot at the beginning, the structure, but it's true once it gets like too formal and you feel like you cannot move from it, then it's a blocker, right? And you need to like break the rules that you made for yourself at the beginning to actually push
Yeah.
forward.
And like, I mean, I found a post today that's going to go out later that I wrote ages ago, and I always have a bit of a scheduler in front in
Mm-hmm.
case I need it. And I literally removed it or scheduled it for later because something on the spot felt more natural for today.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always fiddling like, oh, does it have to do that because the framework said so? No, it doesn't. Let's break the rules a little bit for today.
Exactly. And they are not written in stone, so they're there to
Yeah.
actually be broken. Great. We are running out of time, so I'll be asking two more questions. First one would be if you were to, ever to hire someone to help you with your content or write content for you, what would be the number one quality you'd be looking on that person to have?
That's good because I think we're in a very similar industry, and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
why do people hire us?
Exactly.
Especially in the world with content marketing and ghostwriting and all of that. I think for me, especially at the agency when I have hired copywriters in the past to help with SEO,
Mm-hmm.
is more so a personal trait. Like, do they understand the core of the emotions that we're about to invoke? Because one of my biggest fear, especially when hiring copywriters for other client work, is can they get into the nitty gritty nuances of
Mm-hmm.
the content they're about to write? Because nowadays there's ChatGPT, there's AI, there's all sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
Can you structure it to actually sound like the person that you're going to do is one thing, and the other
Mm-hmm.
thing is flexibility. So when somebody, especially if I'm on the receiving end and I get something, are you able to take criticism and feedback? Because a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people that might have been successful for themselves, when it comes to doing work for others, they might get a little touchy feely about, why is this person giving me this feedback?
Yeah.
And I think having that emotional intelligence is a big cornerstone.
Yes, and then being humble, right? Because at the end, when you write something, even if you're writing for someone else, you put a lot of effort and emotion into it. So when you get criticized, it can be hurtful, but taking that in a positive way, it's super important to then improve. And I can totally get people getting offended and ego blasted because of that. So
Yeah, yeah,
cool.
and it's really cool where, especially when we are doing work for others, they might be like, "Oh no, do it this way." And
Mm-hmm.
on the giving side, it's kind of like having the emotional intelligence to understand that and also portray to them why you're doing it. Like, what is the purpose? I've
Mm-hmm.
had some sort of strategy. There's an outcome, so this is written in this way to get you that outcome. Otherwise, we're just posting, randomly without expecting something.
Yeah, there is a reason behind each word I've used, so
Yeah.
take that into account for sure. Awesome. And then the last question I always ask everyone that participates in the podcast is what would be the book that has impacted your life the most?
Um, that is a good one. We've read lots, but I would say The Almanac of Naval Ravikant is by
Mm-hmm.
far the best thing I've read and reread and still reread on occasion because that guy just teaches you, in this digital economy, how to use leverage
Mm-hmm.
in order to buy back the little time that we have left and use tools like software and writing to actually make more time for what you enjoy.
Yes, I loved that book too. I've read it only once, so might be my sign to reread it. Awesome. So it's been great. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you have a very nice day.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.